for coming today to experience how we make face jugs. So a little bit about myself. I am Crystal King. I am one of the generational potters in Seagrove. My mom and dad are Terry and Anna King. They ran King's Pottery for 35, 40 years. And they just retired and closed their shop, which I am still getting used to. As we see in Seagrove, we've had probably about 8 or 9 shops that have kind of retired or closed since the pandemic. And for someone like me that has been in Seagrove my entire life and looked at some of those shops as like the greatest and the anchors and the pillars of the community, to watch them retire or to kind of pass the torch now, it's really been something to get used to. So I guess I'm one that's catching that baton that's been passed and kind of realizing my place in Seagrove, what that means, and something that's bigger than myself and what I have to offer. So face jug making was a family tradition. My mom and dad apprenticed with Dorothy Allman, who was an 8th generation potter in Seagrove. She was really instrumental in the community because she was such a historian. She cared about Seagrove and she cared about the craft. So her legacy was, I mean, she literally wrote the historical book on Seagrove because she was a big researcher. I remember her office in her home where she did all of her research. And she created the first pottery museum that was in Seagrove. So while my parents apprenticed with her, the Seagrove Pottery was the name of her shop. And she married Walter Allman, as many of the potters married into other potter families and created their own store. So her dad was C.C. Cole from C.C. Cole Pottery. What's very interesting in that is that at that point in time, mostly it was the sons who learned the craft from the dads. So it was always handed down to the sons. But you have family units that are getting smaller. So instead of 10 kids, there's now just 2 kids in Dorothy's family, her brother and herself. So now as a female, she is learning to turn as a teenager and was one of the first women potters in not just North Carolina, but really in America. I think that's really fascinating to think about Seagrove heritage and what it plays there. Her cousin, which was Nell Cole Graves, and many of you would know her as well, was in the same position. Nell was learning to turn as a teenager. And so they were, there's videos of them, if you go back, black and white videos of them at 14 years old, throwing hundreds of pots, which was the production way, hundreds of pots a day for their families. So that's how Dorothy was raised. She marries another potter and they create their own store. And so making their own way in Seagrove, but in the traditional way. But for her, she loved folk art. Now this is in the early 70s. She had made face jugs, but it was a handful. It wasn't really a production of them. It was more about the art and the craft that she was historically aware of. And then she quit for whatever reason in the late 70s after a couple years. So when my parents came along in the early 80s, like 1983, 84, she was looking to hand down her tradition. So again, families are smaller. Her only son decides to go into corporate America, which is, you know, pottery's not a necessity in the 60s. And so he goes on to corporate America, and Dorothy is very concerned about how to hand down her legacy. So she's looking for someone local, someone tied to the family. And my mom, bless her heart, was always very crafty, into every craft she could be a part of. And in conversation with Dorothy, finding out that the families were linked somewhat, my parents started a 2-year apprenticeship with Dorothy and Walter to learn pottery. So what that meant was learning everything to do with clay, but not a lot to do with glazes. Because in Seagrove, it was still a very competitive market. So if you think about this is, you know, early 80s, when you had all the traditional wares were very similar. Everyone made a Rebecca jug. Everyone made pie plates. Everyone made the same coffee mugs. It was very functional oriented. But if you taught someone your glazing, it would be really easy for them to do what they had learned and just go out and do the exact same glazes that you did. And then they're going to have a shop right beside of you doing the same thing. So Dorothy and Walter felt like it would be best if mom and dad learned glazing another way, which they ended up coming to MCC when I was 5 years old. And I was just telling Lori that I have memories at 5 years old of being here in the afternoon for the night classes, because they would apprentice during the day and my dad held down another job to support them during the day. And I was here a couple times with them. And along with, I remember Mark and Meredith Haywood from Why Not Pottery being here at that time, and Dwight Holland, who went on to be very important in the pottery community here as well. And they were all here together in those first early years, which is kind of fun to look back on.
Are y'all familiar with Dwight Holland and the Randolph Arts Guild and all of that? He's the one that started the North Carolina Potters Conference, correct?
Yes. Well, I think Dorothy and him, yes, they were on the same committee to do that.
To start that.
Yeah, so he was.
He just passed away recently, like in the last 3 years. I want to say
Sure.
he just passed away
Yeah.
recently, and he had an incredible collection of pottery that he.
He was a big advocate for and even studio artwork in the area, not just Seagrove area, but in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of that was kind of happening in those early years. And then, so after 2 years of apprenticing, the one thing that Dorothy wanted my mom and dad to focus on was face jugs and also grate pieces. You've seen the hand-rolled grate pieces that are applied to pitchers or Rebecca jugs or jugs. So that was a tradition that was really historical down in Georgia. And the face jugs, which were historical for North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And this is before what I consider the revival of folk art. That's a term that I've come up with, but when I'm teaching and talking with people. But what's interesting is that in the early 70s into the early 80s, face jugs were still primarily unknown to the masses. You had something very important happening at that time. You had Berlin Craig, who is North Carolina's most famous face jug maker, and I'm going to show a picture of him. Have this nice poster, and I brought one that's going to be here for you guys to have on the wall. But this is Berlin Craig in his workshop, and he is making one of his jugs. So in the late 70s, he starts making these jugs and making kiln load full. Not just one or two, but making a significant number. And historians are really, at this point in time, realizing the history of it being a Southern folk art, a tradition indicative to the South. And so collectors, books are written, starting to be on PBS and on TV channels, and people are becoming more educated about it and going to his kiln openings. Because of this, and also in Georgia, so in Georgia, there is also a gentleman in that area who is doing the same thing. His name is Lanier Metters. And the Metters family, again, these are, the Metters family is like 8-10 generations deep. But Lanier, I really credit Lanier and Berlin Craig with kind of keeping that thin little thread of this folk art alive. And because of both of them, this legacy starts to be noticed in the 80s. And in the 80s, then more information is coming out about it that makes it, since there's an interest, then there's now availability for the potters to make them and to sell them. And because of that, more of them are being made, especially within those traditional families. And for instance, like my parents, I remember those first few years, my parents couldn't hardly give them away. People would come in the shop, they didn't understand them. What is this ugly thing? They were $25 for something this big, and people just didn't get it. But my parents continued to make them, and they continued to take me to visit all of the other traditional potters. So we would go to Georgia. We would go to the Hickory or Vale area of North Carolina. And really, in that time period, so starting into the early 90s, much more interest in it, many more people collecting from these traditional families. And what was interesting about face jugs, and I brought some examples to show you, is that in the families, there's a specific style and look to each family and then to each person in the family. And I think that's what made face jug collecting very easy for people to get into, because they're identifiable and they sort of hold a collectible value because people can identify it. For instance, this is a Berlin Craig. And what's interesting about Berlin Craig, that's the man in the poster that I showed you. So he started in the 70s and continued on into the, I guess, late 90s, when I think he passed in the late 90s. Might be wrong about that. But his version of the face jug was similar all through those years. So 20-some years, same face. But what's amazing is that we can literally tell when it's made by certain attributes of the firing and maybe glazing. Some of his earlier ones did not have any, he had not developed the whites in the eyes yet. It was all one color. And that might show you that it's an earlier piece, wood fired, and that would be worth more. So collectors really can get down to the fine detail of like telling a time period, even though it's only stamped or maybe signed and it does not have a date on it, but we can kind of tell. So that is, and he did swirlware. That was a technique in the Vail, North Carolina area, which here had been passed down to A.V. Smith. So you see this lovely, more contemporary piece with the swirlware, which is not really a Seagrove style, so it's not something I've never actually tried to do a swirl. I'd like to. This is Marie Rogers, one of my favorite because she was a female artist, and there were very few face jug female artists early on. Her husband was a potter and died before I was born, and so out of necessity, she continued her craft. You see how primitive it is? It's what I absolutely love about it, because folk art is about being self-taught or family-taught. And her primitiveness stayed in and was evident in all of her pieces. She wrote little things on it, like there's her name, and here it's, she stamped it here as well, but yet this one says Jesus Saves. There's one in particular that she made that she would use the white clay that would melt in the kiln because it was overfired. They found that by accident, but then all the potters knew how to do it. And she has one where the eyes have melted out, and it's No Tears in Heaven, and that is a piece I'm still looking for. So when you get into collecting, some of the potters like Berlin do the same face for 30 years, but someone like Marie, she got into sculptures, she got into different faces. She did an Abe Lincoln, she did just many different types, but there's still a style about it that it's easy to identify. I have these here. These are my parents. So just to kind of show you, like in one family, and both of these are actually wood-fired and fired in our salt glaze kiln. But you can see the difference in the coloration from, they're probably two different firings. But I had saved these out just to show you like the details of how maybe being in the same family, you might use the same clay and same glaze or same technique. And you may influence each other. Like for us, we do the white clay eyes instead of painted. So that would be a family attribute, but that each maker has their own personality. You almost can't help yourself. It's gonna come out in the style that you make. So very easy to identify my dad's versus my mom's more comical. And often in my classes, I'm using my mom. My mom has a very fun personality, very kind of quirky fun, and it really shows in her pieces. Her pieces are a little more loosely formed, but they're still, a fun and well sought after piece. This is another person, more contemporary jug from down in Georgia. I brought it just so you can see some different facial characteristics, and we'll talk about that when I'm making the jug. This guy's name is Dale Butchell, and he is a current maker. Dale Butchell. Yeah.
Okay.
And he is from Georgia. I sell some of his work in my shop, but I just think it's a really nice kind of caricature jug, and just to kind of, when we were showing a demo on the pieces, I can point to different ways. These are all of mine. These just came out of the kiln this morning. I stopped by the shop. Yeah, these are for sale if you're interested, and if not, that's okay. But that way I can point to different ways that I formed the mustache or the features on it. I did use an ash glaze on this, which I can fire in my gas kiln, or I can put it in my electric kiln, which is kind of nice. I did fire electric kiln this weekend, and it's from that. Yeah, so that's a little bit about face jugs and history. Were you familiar with that at all? Curious? Okay, I love that.
I was hoping to inspire them. A couple of them last week, since they knew you were coming, threw some jugs.
Okay, good.
To be able to work on.
Good.
Their face jugs.
Yes,
So while it's
perfect.
Fresh in their minds. So.
Yeah, so usually when I'm throwing the jugs, I'll throw them a few days ahead, and I'll turn, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 at a time, and then just make 4 to 5 a day. Pretty lucky because I have these already made, and you can cover them as long as you keep it covered. I had to add a wet cloth to this. Ooh, pretty soft on that side. I might have to sit this one over here. Actually, I might have to sit that in the sun. It's gotten really soft. Can I get a favor from you?
Got a fan. Do you want me to put it in front
Yeah, let's put that in front of the fan.
Okay.
This is already, yeah. I had covered that one with a wet cloth on Sunday to have a backup one for the class, so it's actually pretty soft. I should have checked it this morning, but I didn't. That's okay.
Do you want it on that bench side?
Do it on the other. I think
Not the dent side. Yep.
we'll put a handle on the dent. We might reach in and press it out. Where's happened? Let me fix this. Okay. All right. So we have some smaller ones we can work on. Yeah, so I guess like, I feel like everyone knows it. And then I'm realizing through these classes that I'm doing in July that the people that are coming for an experience. They have no idea.
They don't really know.
Yeah, they have no idea about it. And so I told you that I kind of, with so many shops closing and me realizing I'm the next generation, especially from Seagrove, and what does that mean? I'm realizing my role in teaching the history. So I do collect face jugs myself, the vintage ones. I call it vintage just to understand new versus old. And I acquire collections that people are trying to sell, and I have a lot of collectors that come to me looking for certain ones, so I help them build nice collections out from these makers. I did. So I acquired a 100-piece collection from a couple that was downsizing. They collected 20 years ago, and they had some really nice pieces. So since that collection was so large, I did an email blast and promoted so that my collectors would see it and come in for that. So that did really well. Yeah, it's nice to have these good quality ones coming back. If you come in my shop up above, they have shelves above the windows. It's basically a museum collection. Like, you can go through and learn so much of the different makers, but I have them on display there because my house is full. Yes, as my house is full. But yes, I can point out some of the historical ones, and you can see the variety in how they made it. And what's interesting is if you pocket it from the Georgia makers versus North Carolina, it is still a regional style. The Georgia makers have a certain look to them, the historical ones. And then of course you have here in Seagrove, but then you also had the Catawba Valley area had a large number because Berlin Craig, this guy, was from there. And so once he started getting a lot of historical notoriety, then the other makers in that area, apprentices and other people, were able to kind of make and sell, and therefore what I call the revival of face jug making.
Where is he from?
He was from Vail or Hickory, near Hickory.
Oh, okay.
North Carolina. So that was a really big area. And then Georgia, the North Georgia mountains, was Linear Metters and his whole family, and the other pocket of, generational potters. So, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I mean, it's enough to still learn. But anyway, they picked up this, I should say, how did the early potters start making face jugs? It is very well known that they learned making the face jugs from picking it up from the slave jugs that were being made. So mid-1800s to late 1800s, there are many historical face jugs that have surfaced that were made by the slaves, definitely in the Edgefield district of South Carolina. There was a factory, if you will, there of making large and storage pots, and they basically had slave labor to do that. So we historically know that there were face jugs made there. They did not look like voodoo. They did not look like their masters. They did not look like all these things that people talk about. I truly believe that at the end of the long day, they were doing artwork as well. And when the settled potters of the historical families from here traveled sometimes and worked as journeymen, they would go to different areas to seek out work. They'd send a brother, they'd send someone to different places, and we know that they came across the idea. And then they brought that back up to their own families. And there's early pictures in like the 1920s of, one that stands out to me is Harvey Enoch Reinhardt. And he has this black and white picture of him holding a board, and there's two face jugs on either side, and he's joking. So that really helps us see that it is always really an art form to all of these makers. It was really not something they ever sold. It was just a handful. It wasn't mass produced for sale, not into the folk art revival where there was a demand for them. But it's that demand that allows us to carry it on. That's just the truth in art and ceramics. It's the demand that allows us to continue with one type of idea and have it carry on. So, all right, so that being noted, we'll start with a jug. This one is leather hard. One thing I'll say about it is if you let your pieces get too dry, and then you think of your clay as being so soft and moist, then the difference in drying can make them crack later. That's one of the biggest issues. So you want to make sure that you've got this nice and leather hard. It's why I put the wet cloth around the other one to soften it up a bit. So if it is too dry, don't use it, because you're going to do all that work and it's going to look fine, and then it's just going to end up cracking everywhere and coming off. So as a matter of fact, you know what I do need? I didn't think of this. I need, this will work. I need some water. I didn't want to bring my old, no, this is good. I didn't want to bring my old muddy bowl from the, from the house. I was like, that should stay. That's going to go in there. And this has got to soften. All right, so on my face jugs, and I think this is probably true of almost every face jug maker, I can't imagine it being any different, is that I like to start with the nose, because the nose is the anchor of the face, and we kind of build the features on top of where that's attached. So it allows us to start the whole personalities from it. And we're not going to place it. You've got to think about what kind of space you need for the other features. You might want to just kind of draw it with your hand. If the nose is here, for instance, if it's too low, let me get started here, then it would be not enough room for your other features. I just simply ball up the clay. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to be sculpting it once it's on the piece. So I really just do a light molded shape. And if you think about it, the larger the features, the more boisterous the personality. I watch my students do the work, and it's interesting that we have our own personalities, and it really does show up in the jug. Now, you can plan that out, or you can let it just happen. I let most of mine just happen, but in this case, I'm going to try to go a little bit larger to show you a more kind of boisterous and chunky piece. So if you think about your nose, it's not just a ball, right, of clay. It actually is a triangle. So I start pinching that up into like a bridge. This is the bridge of the nose. And just to get an idea, I will place it there to see if I like how large it is. And you want to make it a little bit larger because you're going to work it in and you're going to lose some of it. So sometimes I see students, they make their features really small, not thinking that they are going to wipe it and work it into the clay, and you're going to lose part of that. So a little bit larger than expected. I think this will be good because I'm going for a really maybe big nose, big face. All right. Of course, you guys know that we don't want to trap air behind the nose when we apply it. You'll see many of face jugs with noses and lips and things blown off because of this mistake. So what I do after I score and slip very generously, I tap it on the table to make it flat. Because the least little bit, let me do this, you know, the least little bit trapped is going to explode it off. And that happens often. But before I score this, I like to shape it on the board, the nostrils. So a little hint, our nostrils are not on top, because I teach the beginner classes, I see that a lot. It's kind of a piggy face. Yeah, they're not there, they're underneath, not on top. So I like to lay this down, and I use basically my thumbs here as I'm holding it, almost like this, to just start some nostrils. We can shape them more once we get it on there, but I'm just pushing up in. And once I have that general shape, I remember, by the way, teaching my dad this. He would probably never tell it. But I was 13, 14 years old in the family. I was exhibiting a lot of sculptural skills. And my face jugs had a little more detail even than my mom and dad's. If you see my mom's nose, hers is very softly formed, where if you see my dad's, how the nostrils really flare out and have a lot of detail. But I remember working in the workshop with my parents and my dad making face jugs beside of me and me saying, you know, showing him that and showing him the shape of that. And him taking that where his are even more shapely, I think, wow, mine. But I do remember, he may not, but I'll lay claim to that one. All right, so I've got a basis, and I'm going to score the back of the nose. Really good. I see people that are afraid to get this wet. I mean, sloppy on this is good, because you know the slip is what helps it bond. And when you attach it again, trying not to catch air underneath. And then just like the shape of the nose, this is kind of scooping backward, because you're going to work that in on the piece. And then I'm going to come underneath. Now, I feel like that nose is really elongated, so I have two options. I want to make sure I have plenty of room for the mouth. And I do not worry if the scoring is excess on the side, because you can just, especially if the the piece is dry, you want this to have as much clinging ability as it can to work in. So I might score it extra if I feel, and I'm going to kind of push that clay down. And I'm going to push it up too, because I feel like it's not leaving me a lot of room. So I've got a big honker on that one, which is what I wanted. I wanted that. And I'm working it in just with my finger. I do show my students that if you have smaller features and you got long fingernails, it might really be hard to work in without getting, so these tools that have just a soft, something that you can use to get up under there, that works. Or the back of my fingernail I find works really well, but my nails are fairly short.
So a little plug for Crystal, are all your classes full?
For face jugs, yes.
For face jugs?
Yeah.
So next
Next summer, yes.
Next summer, she does on Saturdays, stepping in, well, are we calling it stepping into the craft?
Yeah, stepping in the craft, Summers in Seagrove.
Summers in Seagrove.
So for the month of July, I don't have any shows or anything going on in July, so we created this event in Seagrove that's more about hands-on and demonstrations. So several years ago I said, okay, great, I will play along and I will start doing these classes for making face jugs, and it has just really went well to where they sell out now. So I don't have any more for this year, but if you get on my mailing list, there's a card here, my website, sign up for the mailing list. And next year, mid-June, I announce the spots for the classes, and you can just book it online. And then we basically each make our own. So I turn the jugs for them, and then I show them step by step. Like right now, they would all be making their nose after watching me do it. So it's fun. I have people that now repeat it so they can create a different face. Yeah. And they get to hear the history, and it teaches, so I feel like it's a good thing. So I may also, if you're trying to sculpt the nose a little more, I might go back at this point, like these nostrils here, give that a little shape. I have seen people, they get the clay too thin. At this point, you could go back and add to make the nostril. That's okay to do that, but okay. So he's there. I may wait to work on him anymore because we're going to be adding the eyes and the lips underneath, and that's going to alter and distort what we're seeing anyway. So don't get it all perfect. I say do that at the end. All right, so now we're going to work on eyes. And what my family has always done is to use a white clay. We're going to switch from the regular stoneware, buff or whatever clay you're using, and go with a white stoneware clay so it can fire in the same firing. There again, we were talking about using, if you use the earthenware white in the stoneware firing, it might melt out. That's what happened to Lanier Metters and Marie Rogers when they found out that their clay wasn't suitable, and it just melted right out. They call those crying eyes. So it actually got a name and became desirable because they were rare.
Do they continue to do that?
I think now it's on purpose. Yeah, now it's an on purpose thing. But so this white clay is interesting. It's not porcelain. You can use porcelain if you're firing in a cone 6 and above. But this is a white stoneware, and it looks almost the same color. So, but it does fire out just like these. This is what I used here. And you're basically just making 2 more matching round balls. You can do different, whatever you choose. You can, like I brought this one because if you notice on this one, the discs are very flat. Where my mom and dad, if you notice on my mom's, this is what I love to point out about hers. She has the 2, and they are very round eyeballs. And she places them together on top. Versus my father, which is more elongated. So he might make them more oval. He might even flatten it. And I'll be honest with you, I sometimes make 1 ball and cut it in 2. So it's flat on the back and not as bulging. So do you want bulging eyes like my mom's? That's like 2 round, like stuck on top. Or maybe 2 flatter. Let me see which one of these. That's pretty round. Well, they're on, if you look, they're on either side of the bridge of the nose. So on this one, I'm going to do it like this. And I'm kind of flattening them, but we need to score. You don't have to work this in at all because you're going to add an eyelid to make that. And I'm doing this upside down. so there's no telling what this is going to look like. I have to turn it around to see. Yeah, so we're going to leave a little room on this particular one because I'm going to build an eyelid over top that will also help hold it in. And while we're just pushing it gently on, we'll build an eyelid over top and underneath. And get this white clay because it looks just like my regular stoneware.
Yeah, I imagine that might be an issue.
It is.
Every once in a while.
Yeah, because when it fires, if I have it all, modeled in, it's going to be a swirlware nose or. All right, so for the eyelid, we're just going to make a coil. I roll it by hand. Some people find it easy to roll it on a table to get their shape. And we're going to flatten it. I just simply touch my finger in the water, and I'm going to do this on the side, and just kind of rake it. You could pound it, but I think doing this, I want it to be fairly even. And then I look at it and I decide if it's thinned out. This is probably about just right. And our eyelids are not going to come way down here. That does make the piece look sorrowful or sad. So I've noticed in class a lot of people have a tendency to pull it on down here. Think of your eye, your eyelid really comes to the middle of your eye. And we're going to have enough one that meets in the middle. So I'm just going to pinch it off here, and I have enough for the other side. I'm not real particular if it's exact and perfect match. That can give it some personality. So I'm just going to lay it up there, judge it, pinch it, and now we're going to score and work it in. And again, you're going to be working this only on the top. We're not working it in at the eye at all. That creates that overlap. So I'm going to score, and I will tell you, the corners of these pieces, especially if your jug is dry, too dry, that is where the cracking happens. Because as it shrinks, it wants to pull inward, and these will have corner cracks. So I score both pieces. People have a tendency when they're doing the jugs to have it not touch and have a space. You see the space? That's a big tendency with people putting it on. You do want to overlap it. That's going to make it look more natural. It's a lid. Yeah, we're creating the illusion. Like our eyes are sunk in our head and the eyelid is on top. We're kind of, without pushing in on the jug, which you could, but most of the face jug makers use, they don't push in on their jugs. There's a few makers that do, and they're very sculpted, and you can play around with that. But for a majority of us, just have a solid jug. We're not pushing it in at all. We're creating the illusion of the effects coming out. So with this, I am working it in with my finger. I have fast finger work. That's from years doing it. Again, you could use your tool right here. I'm trying to slow it down, but my finger, I can't hardly. I have like really fast working fingers from sculpting my whole life. So on this, let's not forget to score it because it will come off.
You mentioned that about the cracking on the edges. Really, how do you really avoid that?
So that is again, making sure that the jug is soft enough to match the clay. If it's too hard, I would cover it with a wet towel and let it absorb some of the moisture again. If it is too dry, it will crack. And also not fast drying it when you're finished. Like this jug, if we went and put it right out into a kiln room, as wet as it is, that would definitely crack the edges because you've got this, shrinking going on with the clay you've added versus the shrinking of the jug. So in that way, I think it's fine because that one was really soft. We'll give it another, I might, after this, we'll check on it. So yeah, and also blending it well. So scoring it, not being afraid to score it, not being afraid to score it even up here if it's dry, because we can cover that up. It's more about letting that bond. Did I get that? Yeah. And definitely scoring down here in the edges. Okay? Definitely. It happens on my pieces all the time. The cool thing about face jugs and the type of style that I do, which is really folky, is that they're not perfect, and people accept that and expect that. So I may go, when it's drying and I'm sanding it before the first bisque firing, if it has cracked, I'll just take a pencil and, if the crack is there. You can do some repairing methods, but most of the time I'm just going back and making that crack a drawn line And sometimes it will just stick with it and look purposeful and intended. Let me see if I have any here. That one was fine. This one might have had it. You can come up and look later. There's a little bit right here, but see the glaze has even kind of worked with that to where we can't see it. This one's fine. Yeah, if you look really hard, that one kind of had it, and I kind of smoothed it over. So I do have to look at that. But right here, again, we're going to do the lower lid. I want you to look at this one of Doll's. He basically blended his eyelid as the eyebrow. Now we're going to make eyebrows separate, like if you look at my dad's, separate. My mom's separate eyebrow from eyelid, but he used the one. So that's another technique, and I think it's kind of nice, especially if you put the eyelid on and it's too huge. Maybe the next jug I'll do that to show you that technique. No, you can. It's just a different technique. So he also does not have anything underneath the eye, and that works on his jug. But on most of them, like right now on mine, I feel like it's missing something. You can see how that piece is. Got it?
Yeah.
Yeah, like on his, it's just kind of formed a little. And when you do your first one, you'll be able to tell, I think, what you need. But like my dad's, we've always did a lower layer. So the lower eyelid is the same as the upper, it's just smaller. Smaller coil. And I think it's up to you and up to the eyes that you put on whether you flatten this or not. I tend to flatten mine. I think it looks more natural. It's less bulging. So wet my finger, make that into basically a strip. See, it's about yay thickness. And I'm going to come up under about half. Do what?
Did you score the eyeball?
The eyeball, just to put them on the back, yeah.
But when you put the eyebrow on top of it, did you?
The eyelid here? Yeah, when I did the eyelid, I scored it definitely into the corners even. Just like I'm about to do. I'm getting ready to do it again.
She didn't score the top of the eye.
Not the top of the eye, no. You're really not touching the white eyeball anymore. You don't have to because it's really the illusion of it overlapping. I've had students that aren't listening and they basically start working it in and it just makes a muddy mess on top of the white. It's not necessary. So with the bottom, we're also overlapping a little. And we're just going to meet it over here at the edge, so about halfway on the eye. And for this, I could use my finger, but I'm going to use this tool. It is showing the scoring right here, so that when I'm working in that corner and underneath, you can see that it's kind of meshing together, working together. Don't be afraid to really work that clay in. With all you guys working in here, I think you're fine. When I'm doing the classes for people that have never touched clay, they tend to be afraid to really work that in, so there's this line. And what I'm explaining to them is like what we're really trying to do with face jugs is we're taking shapes to make the face, and we're working them in so that you can no longer tell what shapes make the face. It's kind of like they would have a line there, and I'm like, let's just work it in a little bit more. Yeah, let's see that.
Need to put it back.
Maybe a little bit more, I think.
Okay, a little
Let's
bit
try to push this out. Do you have like a long...
You want me to blow it?
Yeah, do that. See if you can. It might be too stiff. There you go. That's perfect. You did it.
There's no pot in there.
That worked. It worked. That's good enough because I'll put a handle there.
Lipstick on the top.
That's all right.
You know.
That'll...
So you want me to put this back in?
Yeah, a little bit more because I'm afraid if this clay is kind of hard, then when I'm pushing on it, I could wrap that clay. I just said that if that clay was, so I'm using a different clay on that particular jug. It was a wood-fired piece, and the clay's a little stiff. I'm going to put this cloth, it's kind of damp. Maybe it'll absorb some of it by the time we start working on it. Make it softer. Okay, all right, so going back here. All right, where were we at? Okay, we got this lower eyelid. I'm going to, again, score underneath, bring it up around. I'm going to lay this. I kind of like the inside to be a little more narrow, like at the crease of the eye, so just pinching it. Laying it just a little over the bottom of the white. Okay. Pushing it. Pushing it on. And then the tool. So whether I do all my facial hair at the very end. It's kind of tempting to do the eyebrow right now, but honestly, I like to see how the mouth forms to decide on what kind of mustache I'm gonna make, which will dictate a matching eyebrow. That's just how I tend to do it. So we're gonna work on the mouth. We could do the ears, but I tend to make the ears at the end. All right, so I'm just gonna pinch me off some clay. Let's talk mouths here. I like AV's mouth here. You can see that it's just some simple strips, but how he waves the top one just to give it that kind of curve. Simple effect, but it works. What does Marie's look like? Okay, her teeth are pretty crude, right? But you get the idea where Berlin's were simple. I like Dad's mouth when people see it, it's always like crooked, and he started doing that kind of, I guess, in the 90s, because his earlier ones did not look this way. But it is a great mouth. And that's pretty much kind of what I do, so I'll show you how to do that. Where Mom's has her teeth, it's just kind of pushed in and is simple. But just to show you some ideas. But on mine, whether you start with the bottom or the top lip is completely up to you. I suggest if it's your first one, maybe build them separately before you attach them to make sure you like what you're doing before you attach it. I make a coil. If you think about the bottom lip, it's usually bigger than the top, and that the bottom of your lip, that pouty part, that's a thickness where it comes thinner here in the corners. So to do that, I take my coil and I would just kind of, or you could pinch it, leaving a fatness to the middle and the corners pinched out. Let's see if this is too big or little for our jug. I would place it here and curve it. That's kind of my style. Now this one, it's a big smile, but it is not leaving me any room for any kind of facial hair like a beard. So if that were important, I would make the lips smaller. So this is where you can kind of see, I'm probably not going to do a beard on this one. I'll just leave it. Try the top lip. So the top lip can be smaller. It doesn't have to have the same fatness, but it still has the kind of corners. And if you see, like, that's pretty long, I think I'm gonna just make it a little smaller. Watch how it changes. My nose is huge on this, so it's not giving me as much room. But see how you can, how just like changing the face gives it personality. So when I'm making, I do kind of play with it. So straight across mouth versus pinched in, right? I'm gonna go ahead with the top lip. Scoring. Again, the corners. Yes. So on a jug, like when we're doing coffee mugs and they're a smaller face, there is no room to get your hand in to do the teeth. So I actually build them on the back side of the upper lip and attach the whole thing. I can do that now to show you, or I can just put them in. But basically, I would form it out of the white clay and go ahead and put it on the back side, score it, so that they will fall out. The two different clays, teeth are the worst to fall out. Oh, wow. So do score them as best you can. And then when you're putting the lip on, they're already there. So that's one way, especially in a tight space. But on this one, I'm just gonna. This is where, too, you can take the bottom of the nose. We have this marking. I don't have a lot of room, but sometimes I'll pull the clay down from the top of the nose to form that. And I may do it once I get all the pieces and do more detail work. Right now, I'm just kind of wanting to apply it. And then let's work on the bottom lip. Lots of scoring. How is that attaching this way? I think.
Do you ever do caricatures of people?
I don't. I think that's another skill set, to be honest. I have met people that do really detailed caricatures, It's just like the difference of being a, a cartoonist
Right.
drawer versus an abstract painter.
Right.
I'm probably the abstract painter.
Right.
Yeah, it's a whole nother skill level,
Yeah,
right?
it is
So I
it
have
is another
seen,
skill level.
and it looks very contemporary to me. So there are definitely face jug makers that do these amazing jugs with caricature, and I marvel at the skill that they have. It is not the way that it's not my style of doing it, but I do admire it because it's amazing when they are able to do such comical looking jugs. But it is a contemporary style, and part of me wants to stick with a folk style because that's my heritage. So
Yeah.
yeah, but
And I'm glad to know that somebody in Seagrove is doing that traditional, that keeping that
Yeah.
alive.
there's not a lot. You know what's
in Seagrove
interesting?
right now that
There
are
was
doing-
a huge surge of face jug making when that revival sort of happened, and there was so much interest in jugs. I mean, you could find face jugs almost at every shop in Seagrove. It felt like, and now there's maybe 3, 4 of us. So that surge has kind of come back down, which is
I
the
carry
ebbs and
some,
flows.
but I don't make them.
Right.
You know.
All right, I'm gonna do, so I have this roll underneath. That definitely needs to be worked in. So even though I don't have a lot of space, I'm just gonna score that and just grab some clay and work it in. It's not so important if it hangs over, once we sit it down, it sort of will flatten itself. It might push it up, but I don't want it to be left open. All right, so now I have this face going on. And if you can see from where you're sitting, I can give it more of that. If I don't want to put facial hair on it, if I'm going to give it a mustache, there's no point in sculpting all that. I would like a little more room for my teeth though, because it's going to be really hard for me to get my hand in there to sculpt some teeth. So at this point, I might just kind of form that bottom lip down a little more, which look, give it a goofy look, kind of like it, I'm very free with my pieces, and they start forming their personality at this point as I'm making it, especially with the mouth. And I really like that. So I might just let it be. And let's do the ears before I get into the white clay to do the teeth. Looking at ears, they're, to me, one of the simplest parts of the jug to make. But if you look at all these varieties, and you start looking at the collectible face jugs, it's just amazing to see how many different styles there are. For instance, AV's is this, just a strap. And it's pretty big, This is one of the traditional, right? Kind of similar though. And then versus my mom's, very simple little dab of clay on the side, and she simply does a squiggle line inside. So it's just an idea of what that is, but we all know what it is. Our mind automatically registers even with a simple squiggle. So it doesn't have to be a well-sculpted ear. Or maybe you choose to do more sculpting. Mine are pretty simple too, I think, like and I use just the markings to make it the appearance. So the way I make mine is, again, just another pinch of clay, making a fat coil. I do see a lot of students that will, I'm going to show you what they do. They'll pinch it out real thin. This tends to crack. It's also really brittle. So I like thicker. And you want to have a base to work in. So this being so thin, if you were to start working it in, you're going to be stealing away so much of the clay, and it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. So I like a thicker piece. And then I shape it once it's on the jug. So in this case, it's just a coil. I don't know. I want it bigger. His nose is big. I think it needs to be fatter. Let's change. Everything about him's big, so I don't want to make him tiny ears, right? He needs some bigger, fatter ears. So in that case, if I'm going to do bigger, I might even do like this kind of, not teardrop, what is that? I call it it's like a drumstick, chicken leg there. It's still real thick, and that way when I attach it, I've got plenty to attach, and I've got plenty I can pinch and kind of round. So again, if you think about your ears, and I know face jugs are, they're not exact, so it really doesn't matter, but your ears do come from your eye. The corner is the top of your ear. So if you want a hint of where to start it, that's a good starting point. So I'm going to come from right across the eye, and I'm going to make my scoring marks. And I'm going to score the edge. I've done nothing to it. It's just thick enough that I can use it. When I put this on, you can do it straight up and down, or you can kind of curve it. That top gives it, I think, a more natural look, and it kind of curves in a bit. That's huge ear. There's nothing realistic about that ear, but I like it. I like to think that my jugs are, you know, some are mean. Some face jugs are just stoic, and some are mean, and some are happy. And I like to think my personality in the jugs that are happy. Yeah. You definitely want to spend a little attention up on the top. This is another cracking point, and below. So scoring, even though, and working it in. It's a choice if you have enough that you want to work in the back. To be honest, your ear on your face is like this motion, right? But the back is very open. I don't really work in the back of my ear. Most of these, though, are. You see that's been worked in. My mom worked hers in. But, I mean, it's just up to you. On this one, I actually have a lot of room with clay, so I would go ahead. Are his worked in?
Nope.
Okay.
Those are not.
So yeah, usually I don't, but on this particular clay, I kind of feel like there's enough that I could, so I'm gonna go ahead. And I like to use a very, you see how I got that in a little bit of water, but I kind of wrung it out. There's no moisture, I mean, there's moisture, but it's not dripping. That allows me to kind of smooth that clay. If you have fingernails, that's your tip of the day, because your fingernails getting in it, this will really smooth it out. Don't worry, you know, if you wait to sand it, you'll never get it out. So, to go back through and work it in. I'm gonna pick it up. All right, and this is where you could go back and form it. I mean, their little point might look kind of devilish, right? I'm not gonna do that on this one. But I'm gonna kind of form it, pinching, coming down to the earlobe. If your jug is softer, sometimes you can press in a little. He's got huge ears. I think that's just gonna work on this with big features. Okay. All right.
When you first started, I thought, wow, that's a little tiny jug. How is she gonna make that nose look right?
Work on it, yeah.
Little bitty jug, but man, that looks awesome.
That's why I said the nose it kind of dictates the whole rest of the piece. So if you are big, you're gonna have these big features. If you've went small, and you can see this is a little larger than what I tend to do naturally when I'm making several, but it's fun to play around a bit,
Helps us be able to
see it.
what, yeah.
And when I am working on 5 or 6, in my mind, I like variety. So for mine, they will all have a little different face as I'm working on the 5 brothers, because they're all made at the same time. But there are plenty of face jug makers that do the exact same one every time, and that's okay too. It's just their way. All right, so trying to match this will be fun. So if you really are concerned with them matching, you might make 2, and then that way you can get them the same before you put it on.
So you don't do like a ball and then cut it in half to use both?
I don't.
You don't?
But I'm not really that concerned myself with it being perfect.
Right.
I think I make so many that it's
Yeah.
really more about being loose and each
Yeah.
one just like that kind of coming out.
Yeah.
And it may be that as I'm looking at it that this ear is different. That, you know, sometimes like the lopsided, like this one is very similar, but sometimes this eyelid is bigger and it'll cause it to kind of shape upward.
Right.
And that might cause you to put an ear downward, as if, kind of like on my dad's, how it's kind of crooked. So I guess I don't go into it thinking that.
For you.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. It kind of comes to life as I'm doing it. And I might even sit there and laugh at my own pieces, like, oh, that's cute. You know, like this one's kind of getting me with the mouth.
Yeah, it's funny.
All right, so here's another piece I think that's similar. Maybe we can shape it the same. And I'm going to have to look at it to get it on the opposite side correctly. There we go. Again, kind of curving it as I put it on top, and then you see how it's curved. It's not just straight up and down, which that's a preference. You can do it either way. It's a big ear. I might pinch a little off the bottom. See, I can see that's a little bit. And you can always do that at the end. I mean, you can carve it off. I think I'm gonna do it now because I can see. All right, so I just carve a little away, no biggie. So I just had a video of my father that resurfaced. There was an article on me making face jugs and being in Seagrove that just came out in WRAL for Raleigh. And the article talked about me, but at the top of it, in the internet, on the website, it had this video from 2016, which was an interview with my parents and my dad. And so I watched it, and I was just like, oh. I don't remember ever seeing the video, but it's my dad talking about face jugs. And he tells about living the clay life and making pottery in general, but about face jugs, and it shows him working. So if you go on my website, and I put it on the YouTube channel so that I could share it. So Crystal King Pottery, I don't have many things on YouTube, but I put that there, but you can get to it through my website. But go back and watch it. It's 4 or 5 minutes long, but it made me very nostalgic for my parents' pottery shop, which is where I grew up, and just that kind of felt like a simpler life for some reason watching it there, and him talking about face jugs. But one of the things he stated was that, of course, whiskey, so jugs in general there's an article that Dorothy Allman wrote in her book that said 75% of what the Seagrove potters were making before the Prohibition were whiskey jugs for storage. And so they made all of these jugs, and they put them on the wagons, and they put them on the train that went through Seagrove to export them. But then the Prohibition happened. So that really did away with the need for the jugs and changed Seagrove business in many ways. But it was those whiskey jugs or jugs that were used for all storage vessels. So my dad's talking on this thing about how when you had the jugs in the creek, that was your refrigerator. And so as they're in the creek bed or as they're on the shelf, you needed to know which face jug might have the moonshine or the poison. I mean, how many had poison? But they would have moonshine or other liquors, and that was the one that they knew not to get into or let the kids get into. So I thought, well, that's a really good take on why they needed face jugs. But yeah.
That's what I was thinking, it would scare the kids away.
Yes.
This third one from the right probably had poison in it.
Maybe this one right here. Yeah, one of Perlin's.
The others look okay.
Yeah. There we go.
I love that you know your history. I think that is phenomenal.
Well, thank you. I was part of, I don't know, I did care about it as a young person, but I was surrounded with it. Yeah, I was surrounded with it. My parents were.
Unique upbringing.
I do. I feel really fortunate in that. I really do feel I mean, it was just a matter, there are so many things that happened at the right time, too. That's why I'm even a potter. Because there was this interest that I had in it as a young person, and my parents and their background, and I was an only child, so I went with my parents to every folk art meeting and to visit all of these potters. But I, still had to make the decision to do it for a living. And all of that happened, believe it or not, at the same time. I was in high school when Pottery Highway, when the bypass was going around Seagrove. So pre that, all of the beach traffic and all of the race traffic going to Rockingham went right by my mom and dad's shop on 220, all those shops on 220. And we would get, I bet 70% of the people that walked in the shop said, "What is this place? We see all these pottery signs. What is it?" And we'd educate them on what Seagrove was, give them a map, and send them on a tour. But without that, and with the traffic going around Seagrove, people would have to know what Seagrove is first and make a point to come out. How would that affect us? That is why my father knew that he needed a store on Highway 705. And he was right. Later it became deemed Pottery Highway. It's if you get right off the exit, and now many people have relocated to that main way because it's the way the traffic flow. So for me, I'm graduating high school. I love doing pottery, but I realized that I would be needed to run that family store, and I can make my pieces separately from my family and have like a chance at it. So all of that happened at the same time. So I look at that and I'm like amazed. So eyeballs. Eyeballs on different versions here. Let me turn that around. So like his are painted. And what you find, I don't have one on me, but many of the Georgia families would just do a white and they would paint. They would glaze, paint. They would not add clay. So this is kind of one of those family indicators and regional indicators. My mom and dad were taught to do the white clay with a center eye pupil of dark clay. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. I just basically make 2 small balls of dark clay. So we've already got the white clay here. And I don't score them because that gets really messy, but I do kind of make this white part wet and tacky. And what's fun is here we've got like the general personality going on, so we can play a little bit more with positioning. So we want him looking to the side, or we want him looking straight forward. Okay, I can't see this because I'm upside down, but just giving y'all a or we want to cross them. Okay, so you can play with that before you choose. And when we do choose, it's just making that tacky, and we're going to, I'm going to make him looking sideways, I think. All right, and I'm just going to basically press it a little. I am not making this muddy. That's what I see some people do with too much wetness, and I'm not working it in any way. I'm just kind of giving it a little press.
So you're using the dark slip though?
I'm using the same clay, yeah, that this is right here on top of white. And, word to the wise, it's tempting to go too big. And when you go too big with these, then when you mash them, they get bigger, and then they have this effect of like Cheerio looking eyes that looks a little elementary. Go smaller. Yeah, don't do Cheerio eyes, that happens. So
So the slip you're using, are you using the slip?
I
or
am
are
not.
you
This is
using
just
water?
this is just water.
Okay,
I mean,
so
I kind of make my own slip. Yeah.
It wasn't like a dark slip.
No. Yes. Okay. Yes. No. I just use water. I don't put any dark slip on top of that white clay. You can wash it off,
Okay.
but I just don't get any dark on it if I can help it. And what I found is if you get a little dark on it, it really doesn't show up very much. You don't have to worrying about it too much, right? That was just water though. So here I just press it a little, and what I do is I take a tool, a pen. This is just an ink pen. I use the back side of the ink pen in the same direction that this thing is looking. So it's looking to the side. I'm going to kind of put it right here on the side. That just kind of makes like the outside of the pupil shape. I got to look at it, sorry. So if the direction is over here, I'm going to continue that with this part. It's just a nice little push in to make the shape. And then I take the front of the pen to make the true eye of it. And that really, let me just do it backwards here. Now, I have seen other makers like this one. This is AV. He used some kind of blue slip clay as his, and he made a hole in the white, and then he put in the clay. That's how he did it. So very different from what I do. But mine and my mom's, it's a family style. Turn that one around. Okay, so now we have eyes, and everything is done except for teeth. Let's do teeth. Teeth, white clay. We're going to go over here to our white. There's a couple ways you can do it. Now, my mom and dad, the tradition that Dorothy Allman taught them was to use what's here. These are broken china plate teeth. And I really need to get back to using this. It's just you have to take the time with pliers to bust up these old plates. The thing about bone china is it's fired hotter, so it will not melt in the firing. So they're already ready to go. You just have to, chip them up. So my dad had he always had this like basket of chipped plates already ready to go. But he has to wear, safety goggles and chip them up beforehand. My mom here, you see, she's just used white clay, and they're almost like little chiclet teeth that she's formed and put on right now like I'm getting ready to. Berlin, he almost always did, and that is the way Dorothy did teach them to do. Somewhere along the way, we started having variety with making the teeth more shapely and getting different things. This is a china plate teeth that Berlin Craig always used.
Have you ever used the cones?
I have. They make it very kind of...
They're your snaggle tooth, it makes it...
Yes, it kind of makes them look very edgy or not meaner, but, a little devilish in a way. I have seen it. This is clay. These are clay, but I think that he formed those separately and then put them in. Like they almost look so perfect that I think they had to harden a bit before he pressed them in. So I have seen that. I've heard that Stephen Abbey, he's a face jug maker, and his teeth are very, what I was told is he actually pre-makes them and has a whole bunch available, and then they're hard enough for him to push into the clay. I'm making mine when I make the face. So what we're gonna do is, this is my white clay. Let me move this so it doesn't get confused. And let me see what we got. There's two ways.
I just have a question.
Sure.
If you make them in advance and they're a different wetness,
Yes.
and you're pushing them in, then they're gonna possibly fall out.
I think that, well, the clay shrinks around it.
Okay.
So
Or
I don't know if he fires them or not. I don't know if they're pre-fired or if they're just dry. So I think that they're so small, and you make them like in a cone. I've never really done it, but if you make it in a cone, and then when it goes up into the lip of the clay, and then that shrinks around it.
Okay.
And I think it's because it's made into a cone, it would have less any crackage around it for shrinking.
Yeah.
But I've never done it that way, honestly. I'm just giving ideas when you see the different makers. I make it while I'm making the piece. Yeah, I do them one at a time. So I'm going to show you two different ways. You can hand form each tooth and put it in, and it's a different look than if you do what I'm going to show you with a coil, which will make them all at one time. So I'm going to do a coil first. It's just white clay coil. Of course, it needs to be flat because our teeth aren't round, so I'll just flatten it. And then I'm going to look at the size I have, take my needle tool. I don't need as much as we have here, so I'm going to cut some ends off. Let's see. So each time it's like looking and judging. All right. And honestly, even my coil may be too long, so the teeth are too long, so I'll just kind of cut some off the back. That also gives me a nice surface area to score. It is tempting not to score the teeth. I've had many a teeth fall out because I did not score properly. So at least score this side very well. It is hard to get up under there. Just be aware. So I'm gonna, let's try this. So this one, it kind of slipped to the back. I've got to find some surface to attach it. So I am going to push it. Now it looks kind of flat, but I'm gonna attach it. That's why I'm pressing now, because I wanna make sure they don't fall out. And on this particular one, I'm going to be able to bring it back open there. All right, and I don't like how the edges are kind of hitting, so I'm just going to carve that away. Now that I've got it in, I can see it's still too long. Whoop. All right, now I'm visualizing, do I want it to have, sometimes I'm not sure, but I always start with the two teeth in the middle. It's always centered. Now I can leave it with two over-exaggerated large teeth. It's kind of cute. All right, or I can choose, the front teeth are always bigger than the ones to the side, so remember that. I'm going to give it, all right, so I've created, but I feel like they're too forward, so I'm going to kind of push it back, that size back. And by the way, I'm carving up more than down. That also helps kind of attach it to the top lip a little bit. Tools. I'm going to kind of clean this up on the side a bit, where that white clay sort of, when I cut it, sort of kind of smeared. All right. Funny? Think he's funny? All right, he needs eyebrows bad, so let's work on that. I'm not sure about the facial hair yet because he doesn't have room for a beard. I'm really loving the upper lip on it, so I may not show you a mustache on this one. We will go with eyebrows first. Talking about eyebrows here, we have as simple as like this smaller feature, a small eyebrow. It's just a coil that I attach. Bartlett & Craig, man, he just has a thing here. He didn't texturize his at all. My mom's, which is like a unibrow. It works because the two of her eyeballs are together, where Dad's are highly formed and arching. So you can see, and like his were part of the eye, and I may show you this on the next one, because that's kind of fun to do. All right, so for mine, I think big features means kind of taller eyebrow. Let's see. So a coil, but a coil that comes thinner on the edge. That's what I like to do. Now, if some of these are not like that. This is just how I like to do it. Thicker in the middle. Now I'm going to sit this up there and see, okay, is it too big, too little? It's too big. I think it's too big this direction. Let's see. And maybe too much there. I'm going to go with something like this, but I'm going to go ahead and make the other side. There's that white. Put that up. Okay, kind of place it, judging. I don't like that. I'm going to pinch some off. It's just too much. I'm going to curve it. I don't know, guys. It's a little bit much for me. Pinch a little more off. I'm not loving it. Let's smooth it out. Okay. All right, so I just think I had it a little too fat. That's where it's going to kind of be. So on these, I am generally scoring and working in the front, not so much the back. Part of that is to create this image of flow, like with the arching of hair. So here is the scoring.
I had someone, do like sleeves and they used like a garlic press.
I brought my
Have you ever
tool.
done that?
Yes,
Did you?
yes.
I thought that would be.
I might do that on our next one. I did bring my press here. I will say most of what I do now is this more stylized formed, but my mom and dad were taught with the spaghetti hair, look, the coleslaw hair. That is what Dorothy had taught them and what they did for the first many years of their making. I should have brought one with me. And I do use it on my lions. I do lion sculptures. That's part of my tradition, and they all have the coleslaw mane. But that is it's off a reproduction from a piece made in the 1800s, and it had that kind of mane. Really? Yes. It's really, like I do sheep as well, and people are fascinated with this tool. I think there's an old video of me on YouTube doing a sheep from like 20 years ago, but it's kind of cool. It's a cool video.
Do you want to check this to see if it's?
Yeah, that's perfect. You can just leave it out. Yep,
Great.
thank you. Yeah, I'll do that on the next one.
Yeah, I saw it and I thought it was really cool.
So if you get this done and you don't like it, you can always carve away. I've gave it lots of flow and arching right there. I don't like how long it is. I don't want it getting in my ear. You know, your eyebrows are a lot of your expression too, so playing around with that can change the personality of the jug.
Yeah, I think I've seen the judge's personality change a couple of times during.
All right. And I'm also seeing that this ear is almost like the earlobe is attached, and I might want to go under. I'm just going to be careful that it is still attached. Okay. All right, so texturizing is the other thing to really think about. We have several ways of doing. I'm sure you guys have done it in class from, man, I love this tool. This is, I don't know what it's called, but it has rubber ends on it. I love this tool because it is great for making this kind of flowy motion and drawing in the hair and mustache. So I always kind of go with the flow of the direction, creating movement. Same way with a mustache or beard. Before I had this tool though, I just used a pen or some other kind of small, but here's the thing, you can use a needle tool, but if you think about it, a needle tool gives very fine texture. If you are going for a feminine look, the finer, the more feminine. So sometimes I'll come back on my eyelids and use the needle tool just to texture, even make little pricks underneath the eye, like hair follicles there. In the ear, I'm going to use my tool here to just kind of give it that squiggle line. Sometimes that line, just drew this line on, but it kind of gives us a place for shaping as well. And then to go in with, to create like an ear hole maybe. It's all the illusion of it. And I might even give it a little curve. So we're shaping the ear a little bit more now. So over here again, just kind of this squiggle line, which gives me a place to go back and form more molding shape for a little more detail. Okay, well, all right, another thing, my dad, he loved to take a tool, again, it could be your pen. Oh, and another thing, when you're texturizing, the scoring tool is a great way to make the texture, but it is more, I'm gonna do one just so you can see. We're gonna change it just so you can see this. So just scoring it, see how you have more scratchy? It looks more bushy, right? Whole different. So especially on a beard, and you want a real bushy beard, then something with more texture, fine line texture would work. There he is. All right, he needs, what does he need? Some lines, facial lines. My dad, just drawing them on. Might come from the corner, might come from the side. We've all got a little wrinkles, it's all right. We're gonna put some in on him. Expression lines. And a new trick that I just learned from kind of looking at other jugs is how to add on cheeks and facial lines. So many jugs are kind of basic without that, but like, let's see, this one here has a little bit of, yeah, he has some cheeks. Now on his, I mean, he was able to start, I mean, his chin was definitely added on, right? He was able to press in on his jug, so the jug was not too hard at the time, but press in here to make these facial lines, which makes this seem more three-dimensional. And then under here to make that seem more three-dimensional. So you have to have a fairly soft jug. The problem with a fairly soft jug is then when you're pressing in the nose and the eyes, you're also having to be careful. I'm going to show you just this because I think this makes cute little cheek lines on the side right around here. So you could have cheeks up here that you add on, or you can do this new little right. Let me make sure, because this jug is drying. So I scored it, because even though I'm just working it in a little, I want it, it's just a little bit of clay, we want it to adhere. Okay, so a little cheek there. A little divot. Whoops. Too much of one. What do you think? That's a little bit more. So you can play around with that in different areas of the face. But just know that every time you add clay, that's a potential crack. Every place you add it. Yes, it is. Okay. Do you guys practice handle pulling by hand? Have you done that?
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
who does handles here?
Handles, when you do like coffee mug handles, do you go and use an extruder or do you pull it? You pull it.
We try to do pulling.
It's easier unless you're doing 40 coffee mugs.
Right.
Then an extruder's nice. But when I'm doing my face jugs, I'm usually doing, it's more to go load the extruder.
Don't you, yeah, don't
So I
you
have a
feel
plan.
like, is one way stronger? I feel like pulling is stronger. I
Um,
mean, like makes a stronger handle.
Yeah, because I guess, well, the way I attach it is I pull it and still do the loop. So if you're doing the other way where you're pulling it from the cup,
Yeah.
that does feel pretty strong.
Yeah.
But the way I'm attaching it, I think it's about the same because you're still, I'm going to show you. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I need a little bucket of water. Can I? Okay, just a bucket of water, and I'll pull a handle for this. Okay. What do you guys think? And so I don't worry about some of the, like I sand my pieces. So once it's leather hard or dry altogether, I'll go back and sand some of the other marks and crumbs off of it, especially these burrs. Because if you try to mash it in right now, you know, it's just going to paste in there. But he definitely looks different than these because I started with the bigger nose than what I normally would have. Okay, pulling handles. I've got one. I actually brought one. Okay. Since I only need one, I'm just going to take a little hunk of clay here. To see. Yes. So we were just talking about, I have those classes on Saturdays, and they're for people that have never touched clay. I make the jug for them, and then I show them how to put each feature on. But by the end, typically I would go ahead and extrude a handle for them to put on. But we didn't have them extruded, so I had to teach them how to make their own handle. And they would never be able to do what I'm getting ready to show. That just takes practice. So what we did instead is I just flattened, like rolled out a piece of clay, and they just cut a strip. And we kind of softened the edges with a little bit of water so that it wouldn't look square, and cut, and then attached it.
So this class is a studio class, so many of them already know that. In my beginner hand building class,
Yes, they would have no idea.
I will go over that.
Yeah.
But if they need help with pulling handles, I give them help.
Right.
Many of them already
It takes a lot of practice. I mean, it really takes a lot of experience and practice. So I would, if I'm just doing a handful, I would do exactly what I'm getting ready to do here. Pinch some clay, hold it, and get my hands wet, get it going. I can't imagine the old timers pulling so many handles for all their crocks and churn handles. And then, I mean, they had to have cramped hands because I get a cramp. So if I'm going to do 10, I would pull this way. But if I'm going to do 40, I'm extruding them because my hand gets cramped. So that's why I had the students do their own, because I'm like, I'm not going to pull that many. So I'm just.
In college, they said that extruding was like, that was like cheating. I mean, like, they were like, those professors were like, no, you can't.
Can't.
Extruded handles, and, you know, I had to overcome that.
Right.
That mental thing.
I think Kat had told me something similar from her ceramics program. I'm like, I just see it as a working function. You know, like I've got 40 coffee cups to make. I want them, I mean, I don't have this takes longer and it hand cramps and I just don't have that kind of time. So, but also our style was a different way. I can understand if they're wanting that one look, the look where it's pulled off, which is a nice look. So one thing about how I'm doing it is you're trying to make it, it's still rounded, but it's kind of pulling flat, right? So part of that too is my thumbprint pulling down. You can pull too hard and I'm all the time like, oh, I pull too hard and half of it falls off. That's okay. But yeah, getting the right thickness. I don't really have any tricks that I know of. It's just something I've learned through time. So there's that. And you're leaving it thicker where you're going to attach it. It's always thicker and thinner at the bottom. So you kind of end up with this motion of squeezing that you kind of know the feel for it. Just like everything with pottery, it's all about feel. So I'm just going to pinch it off. And I come on the back of the jug. We really don't have a lot of room here with the spouts. It's a very short handle. That's the other thing with face jug makers. How they turn a jug dictates not just the shape, but like my dad's jugs versus, I don't know. Well, like this one with a short spout. That would be another indicator of makers with style. There we go. So I'm going to score the end that is here up top. Pushing it on fairly firmly and working it in first. And then my rule of thumb is I don't want it real high. I have a lot of students that'll be like way up here. I mean, usually handles typically are under the spout, but my jug has such a short spout, it's sort of a little bit higher. But like this.
Can you talk a little bit about forms? We were talking about this last week, where a couple of them were making forms to be able to do a face on, and I think I told Carol, where's Carol?
to sculpt
You've
it.
not
I've not.
reached in at all because it's a
It's already turned as a jug, yeah.
Right. So,
I would say about 90% of face jugs
our jugs.
are jugs pre-turned. Now, Lanier Metters, and I wish I had a picture for you, you can Google him. He was the most famous Georgia face jug maker. And unlike Berlin Craig, who did all the same jugs for 30 years, the same face and the same style, Lanier made, I mean, he was just an old country guy too that lived, you know, overalls in the backwoods, very like generational. But all of his jugs were highly sculpted, and each one was very different from the other for all those years. All of his were unique. What that lends to in the collectible market is there is a collectible market where everybody knows, well, this style is worth more than this style, and this is of this period, and this is that period, you know. So people do know all those things about his work. But they are very beautiful. But he, from what I understand, he turned them, and they were open, and he was able to go in and sculpt some of the face and then close it up. But you guys know from turning pottery yourself that the risk is that you go in and you're pushing out on the jug and now it's all wonky. When you try to close it up, you have a hard time closing it up. So I think that's why most of the face jug makers turn jugs. They're finished with the jug and then they put the face on. They don't really reach in. It's more about adding clay to get these side features of cheeks, or maybe a soft press like Dahl did here that kind of forms a little bit more of a face out, but Lanier literally sculpted them out. Do you have a picture? Show them that.
Where they
See how bulbous the cheeks are.
bulged out those cheeks, and it looks like you bulged out the chin some.
The average cost of these jugs that Lanier makes is $1,000 to $3,000 now, which he's been passed away, I don't know, it's been a long time. How old am I? It's been, I don't know, 15, 20 years, I'm not sure, but he's been gone a while. But his, I mean, since I was very young, the face jugs have been that price.
Okay.
So I collect face jugs, and I now have two. So I bought one to resell, and then recently, and I'm like, I might just keep this one. So yeah, if you come in my shop, I can point that out. But that was the Georgia tradition. And I love the difference between Berlin Craig, who made it famous really in North Carolina, and how he did the same face for 30 years, versus Lanier Metters, who for 30 years did different faces, and very sculptural, very artsy. So it shows us with traditional folk pottery that you can have one extreme to the other. It's more about the artist's background and their style. Yeah. Cool. Did y'all see that handle? So that would have been the same way. They would have, pulled massive handles for Rebecca jugs. Y'all know what a Rebecca jug is? Oh, wild. Okay. So Rebecca jugs, I'm going to keep pulling on this handle for a minute, were the shape that had the handle, almost every Seagrove potter made them. So to me, they're a very traditional shape. And unfortunately, you don't see them all that much anymore. It's like everybody had them and then nobody has them. I mean, I'm sure somebody does. But a Rebecca jug had a big swooping loop handle. This isn't going to be quite right because there is a specific shape to it. You might have to pull that up for them sometime. But it would basically come up off of it. I'm just going to stick it there for a minute. And it kind of swooped up and come over like that. Have you seen those pieces? Mm-hmm. But they're not jugs. They're more of a very, yeah. But that was a Rebecca jug, something I grew up, everybody had. Now this thing's wanting to stick. Isn't that funny? It's really soft. Look at that. All right. I was just trying to show you all that handle. Okay. All righty. Female jugs. Metters. And it's funny because it's either Metters or meters, and you'll hear people say both. Yeah, from Georgia. They're very famous. He's very famous. And now other family members, there were several brothers, generational, that all had different styles, but his were very important. Okay.
I know y'all were coming for a history lesson today, but we're so grateful. Yeah.
Okay, so we have him. I'm just going to sit him right out here to look at. And, yay. And I'll make another, what time is it? Sure. You know, for years, my mom and dad started naming their jugs, and it became part of what they did. And I just thought, well, so again, my family had two stores, and it's my parents' living, and then I had my living. I'm a separate. So I had to be very careful not to do the exact same things my parents did. If my parents made mugs and pie dishes and bowls, I didn't get to make those things because I sold them in my store for them. So it really pressed me to be more creative. I was already sculpting, so besides face jugs, what I'm famous for is my animal sculpture work, my Bible story sculpture work. So I grew up hand building, and I was doing the lions, the rams, Moses, Noah's, all these things when I was a teenager. It got a lot of interest going in my work, and so that's part of the reason I was able, I knew I could do it for a career. But here again, my parents making the basic functional, and I wasn't really allowed to do that. So that's how I got into doing slab work and trays. Like I did a lot of slab built trays. Not a big deal anymore, but when I started, nobody did that. Nobody did the press molded like trays hand formed. But for me, I was hand building, and it was something so different from my parents that I could, make that without hurting them in the shop. So that's really interesting how it pressed me to do that. So funny thing, now that mom and dad are retired, and now I'm doing those things too. So it's kind of added a little more to the workload because I took on part of their production business and really trying to find my way. This all happened during pandemic. So that changed our businesses quite a bit. And we didn't have the walk-in trade or the show, so I shifted and did a little bit more online sales with functional. And now I'm navigating, but I want to still be known for what I'm known for, which is sculptural face jugs. So how to make sure I'm not forgetting and not doing those or not showing those things. So that's on my mind right now a little bit. Part of why you say yes to teaching and talking about face jugs. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Sure.
The business changed a lot during
Did.
Most businesses did.
Yeah.
Have you seen that it's starting to come back?
Well, it wasn't terrible for me during that time because what was lucky for me is I had a store separate from my home. So while everybody was at the pandemic stuck in their homes and my children were out of school, we come down to the shop every day. And I had orders. I did already have an online presence. I already had an email list. I had people that collected my work. So I was fortunate and set up enough that I just kind of turned my attention instead of a show. My shows were canceled. I said to my public, like, since we're not having this show this weekend here, I'm going to do an online sale. And I created a body of work. So I was working the whole time and created my own shows that were online. What happened was, and I'll work while we talk, I am going to shift to a different clay. This is, if you can tell, this is a little more reddish clay and it has more texture in it. That is because this is a wood fire clay. So a couple times a year, our family fires our big wood kiln. And it takes about a month for us to fill that up together. My dad will still make face jugs for that, vases. I will do my animal sculptures, and we fire in that natural process with wood. So we thought we were going to do that back last month, but we're making repairs to our big kiln, and I had already some jugs turned. So this thing has been sitting there a little too long. We're going to work on it today. But I'm going to switch from this. I think it's good. I think it's good. Yeah. But this is clay from Starworks. It is leather hard, but you saw me just put a little bit on it. So a while ago, yeah, sure. A while ago, this was so soft that it had dented because I had covered it on Sunday. See?
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it same thickness all the way through?
Yeah, pretty much. This might be a little bit. When you close in a jug, it tends to, if you leave a little thickness when turning the jug, it makes it easier to close up. If you've already gotten your piece too thin, it'll want to waver and kind of, yeah. But see, I can really push on it, but it doesn't have that, I don't know how to describe that dry feel when you know that it's dry. I don't know how to describe it. So this clay is from Starworks. They have some lovely cone 910 clays. This is a Okawimi. I better make sure.
Is it Okawimi or Grogawimi?
Let's see, I use both. This one's Okawimi.
Okay.
I use Grogawimi for sculpture. Grogawimi is rough to turn. It's rough. Okawimi turns okay, but Grogawimi has a lot of extra grog in it, which is for shrinkage. So it's a better sculptural clay, but it is rough to turn. So I use both, but I do pick which one for what purpose. Yeah. Have you tried it?
Well, I'm going to start working on learning
Okay.
big pot.
Okay, so
And
that
that's
would
what
be
Kate told me she
grogawimi.
would make grogawimi.
Yes.
I've got a workshop that I'm doing with Cindy in Greenville in
Yeah.
September, and I'm gonna focus on make a big pot.
Okay, awesome.
So,
Yeah, grogawimi would be good for that because you are still hand building it, coiling it. So if you have this on a wheel and it's going through your hand, it's so, the texture, it's rough. Jared and Hannah both work with me, and I ran out of clay and said just use the grogawimi, and they were like, no, not for that kind of production.
no.
I didn't realize until I'm like, oh.
Supply them with Band-Aids.
I turned a few jugs out of it, but we're not turning mugs out of it, you know. All right, so this is my nose, and I'm just forming it right here.
For your parents, when they did the 2 jugs of
That's a good question. I wonder if Dad dated it. He didn't date it. I've had this thing. I'll be honest, this is my mascot. The image on my card and on my sign this was used in it, so that's been 20 years ago. My dad's 65, so he's probably 45. Yeah, around in that. So here's my nose. That was pretty good.
Now, were your grandparents into?
No, my grandmother helped us, but she learned from us. So Dorothy and Walter were who really taught my parents. Now, ironically enough, my mom's mom, but she died when my mom was young, but she worked at one of the pottery factories in Irwin, Tennessee, that hand-painted porcelain pottery. But that was very detached from my mom's mom. But that was kind of detached from, but it shows maybe my mom's natural craftiness, because my mom was into every kind of, she made baskets, she hooked rugs. When I was a child, we did tri-chem painting and soap making. I mean, we did everything. So she naturally, was pulled to pottery. She worked in a mill, and Black & Decker went overseas. And that is one of the things that led them to start that apprenticeship with Dorothy. She was looking for help. And that had just happened to my mom. So, all right, go under here.
I love that nose already. He's kind of off kilter, and I
A little
like
bit. Okay.
That's a different clay.
This is. So
Yeah.
this is actually, this jug was intended for our wood fire kiln. And when I'm firing in that, it's a hotter temperature. I'm usually cone 6. This would be cone 910 going in our wood fire kiln. And I get Starworks has okawimi and grogawimi clays. And they have a little bit more grog in it so that can take that temperature fluctuations. And I like it. A lot of the Seagrow potters do use their clays. I like that it's from the area. And I reclaim a lot of clay, but I don't go dig it out of the ground. So to be able to say that I'm using local clays historically is important to me.
to come in and ask.
Yeah, they ask all the time. They ask, they
Use local clay, and
yeah, they ask all the
I say
time.
yes, because I get it from Star.
Yeah, so that has been a big blessing that, we can say yes now and explain that they're digging for us. But I enjoy making clay, but I'm reclaiming. And I have found that I enjoyed it. I've had several, it started about 10 years ago. How did that happen? I guess the first one was when Laura Avery moved out of town, and she had a whole bunch of clay. As soon as she moved her studio, it was all sitting out in her carport. And I thought, I might be interested in seeing if I can't remake that clay into something. I had a little plaster mold and some buckets. And she said, please go take that clay, because it was helping her clean up. She was just going to haul it off. And so I went and got that clay on my truck bed, and I put it on a pallet under my porch and reworked it all. And I think I just loved the process of taking this old junk and then turning it into something new and watching it get cleaned up. I loved it. And so then I did the next batch. We heard of one of my friends is a teacher at one of the schools, and somebody had called him wanting to give him a bunch of clay. It was from a shop that had closed 10 years before. And this couple had taken it from the shop thinking they would get into, pottery. And that process is really huge for a beginner. So they never touched it. And I went in a couple increments to get all that clay. Truck bed full. It was like all in trash bags. Like when you get rid of balls of clay that you're not using or scrap, it was all in little bags. And then they had put it in big trash bins. And I just went through all of it and reclaimed it slowly, and I just enjoyed
Were
it.
you worried about what?
I tested one,
You tested
and then I just went with it.
Yeah.
I even had different color. Now there was one difference, and there was a white clay, and I didn't mix that. Like I did it separate. But
For the newbie.
how did I test it? I mean, I just made a piece out of it, put it in my kiln. It worked, and then I put my glazes on it, and they worked, and they hold water. So that's pretty much the extent that it's a matured firing that would hold water. So once I knew it was not melting and not bubbling, then it was a higher fire, not a low fire, which is most of the Seagrow potters tend to do that anyway, so I figured. So I used all that up, made old into new, and loved it. And since then, my father has some really nice equipment, but it's at his place, and that's not convenient for me. I was going back and forth. And so I have been looking for some really nice equipment. You guys don't know how lucky you are, the equipment that is here. I mean, it's amazing equipment. Ooh, don't. You guys, to be able to come here and access the materials and equipment, oh my gosh, I could just have such a ball. Because to invest in that yourself at your home, I mean, you can't be uncertain. You can't put $1,000 worth of glazes and then it doesn't work for you. So that's kind of what happened to me is I decided I wanted this equipment, and I had this old potter friend from back in the day who had a whole studio that he wanted to sell. And to get this Peter Pugger piece of equipment, this pug mill to make clay, I bought his whole old studio. It wasn't nice, it was old, an old house. And when I got there were some nice things. Some kilns I was able to use and some I was able to sell, and a wheel. But this pug mill, I mean, it was something to move this thing. And surprisingly, what I was romanced by was all this clay that he had. He had clay from some important historical sites. And he has clay, just, commercial clay. I mean, thousands and thousands of pounds of clay. But we are 3 hours away. So I bought the whole thing because he wanted it cleaned up. I was the person that cleaned up his studio to get all of it, but I still haven't gotten all of it. So this clay is there, and I have plans for some of this clay.
This is when you know you're a potter.
Yeah, I'm just excited about the clay. I'm romanced by making this clay. So some of the clay was by the Huell family down in Georgia. And my mom and dad, they're folk artists who made face jugs. And I grew up going to their Turning and Burning Festival every October. And they don't have it anymore. And the family, everybody gets older, passes away. This kind of thing happens in their family. But anyway, this clay is from there. And I literally have a face jug that I saved that my father used out of that clay. It's kind of a very dark color. But I just like the idea of being able to get that clay, because it's part of my background as well, and maybe make a whole load of work. Yes. And fire it on a wood kiln and educate people about that. So that's a project in my life. I'm excited about it. And I actually think there's actually some Berlin Craig clay there.
Oh.
That's the other. I was extremely excited about that because of myself making, a load of work out of that clay. But problem is the piece of equipment that I bought needs repairs, and it has been a year. I have been working on that thing. It's if you're not a electrician, we don't really have anyone in the area that just typically comes to work on all these things. So I'm kind of at a standstill, and I've been on the phone with them. There's expensive repairs to make to it. But I can try some things first. So Jared Zimmer, that you may know from here, he's looked at it with me. My dad, who used to be an electrician, has tinkered with it. The problem is everybody tinkers and then we all walk away. We get busy with some other thing, like a show, and then it's like, another few months we start again. So that's where I'm at. But like I said, my dad has great equipment, and I have just went back to the bucket, the simple way, the way I did all that the bucket and the little pug meal. And make it by batch. That's what I have.
It's a pain,
But everybody was excited about this big Peter Pugger machine that I got. Now, if I built a shed for it and everything. Like I've got it sitting there. I just need to get it working. So, having time. That's the thing about most potters. I mean, we do have to make our living. So if there's a pending show, we stop and we have to do the work, and then the projects go to the side because we don't have time to stop and just work on it. Oh, well, you're welcome. You know, I told her that I actually haven't been to MCC since I was about 16, and I really wanted to see it down here. And I know that several of my Potter friends have been teachers and instructors, and I like what they're doing here. So this was just kind of my way of giving back about face jugs, but also being here for MCC.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, he's shaping up. So one thing about the eyelids, we were talking about like arching them, so you can like give some shape, maybe, I don't know. So you could just, yeah. Oh, yeah, so. All right, I'm gonna do a lip. Oh, I forgot about doing the eyelid eyebrow deal.
That's okay. We like
I
what you
did.
there.
I
Okay.
can
Don't worry about it. We like that.
Okay, that's so good. I don't want to mess it up. But basically, I can kind of do, I'll show you right here. Yeah, I might mess that one up. Okay, so if this were a chunky eyelid, all right, can you picture it? Here you go, now you can.
There you go.
Chunky eyelid, and there's an eyeball right there, pretend, okay? Kind of figured this out a year or so back to take, I love this rubber tool. It just has this really great edge to it because it's flat, and it bends a little with movement. I mean, you can buy them at any of the supply stores. I don't know what it's called. But what I really love about it, and there's a bigger one, which I would use because this is a bigger piece of clay. But I love to go back and create the illusion. So it's not just a line. I mean, if I drew a line in it, we wouldn't see the same thing. You can, and you can rework that, but it just doesn't do the same as this rubber tool has a give to it. But when you do it and then you have an edge, I just created an eyelid separate from an eyebrow. You see that? And then I would just come back and texture. That is the eyebrow, and then this is the eyelid.
Okay.
So it's one piece.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of neat?
You could do the ear that way too.
Yes, yes. That's why this tool is just really fundamental for that. You could draw it like we did with a pen. I mean, you really could draw, and then you just need it, so it's got too many edges. So you just kind of wet your finger a little and maybe sculpt it. Okay. Oh, that was his lip. We'll start over. That was his lip. Okay, getting it softer. You'll find your clay can get too used and crack. Just get you some fresh, get it wet, let it set back up. I don't like hard clay for sculpting features. And people in my class overwork it, and then there's crackage and not good for it. Okay. All right. So in honor of my dad's crooked lip, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to attach this one right here. I do need to do some facial hair on one of these, the curly. Now, on this one, there's enough clay you could work it in here, but I almost never do that. When you do, it ends up flattening the lip, and I think we're trying to create the overlap, if that makes sense. So I am scoring underneath, even though it's not attached, because I'm going to be working that clay into that scored area. And I just want it to have something to grab to. The other thing is this jug is not loose. If you notice, I really can't show it to you, or the other one I was picking it up. I guess a lot of times the larger ones we tend to leave on, and with the little ones we'll do so many and put them on a bat. But
So
it's something
you
to
don't
consider.
you don't work in the inside lip, but you work
I don't.
in
Now,
the outside lip.
so Mom did, but notice how it opens it up. And I think it creates more of that over the more realistic hollow version of a mouth if
Yeah.
you don't.
Okay.
Yeah. The only thing about you can't really feel. You have to just go by feel.
Because it's still attached.
Yeah, because it's attached to the bat. Sometimes when I turn it over, when it finally pops off and I turn it over, I'll see it's not worked in as well as it should be. So just be aware. And again, the corners are the part you need to make sure. Okay. So again, here you can wet your finger, drag it. And the other cool thing about that edge, so it kind of finishes it off, even though you didn't work it in. Okay, top lip. I got clay in my eye. I'm always splattered with clay. It's really okay. I don't worry about those things anymore. Let's see. So the top lip, I think that's too large. Usually the top lip's smaller, so I'm gonna pinch some off, quite a bit off. Especially if you're gonna put a mustache, you don't want it to be bulging too far out because you're gonna lay hair over top. I kind of like that one. Still kind of big, but I'm kind of liking it. So I think, I love his eye. I'm glad we did that. Okay. So corners, and then top. Doop. Try to do it upside down. Kind of go back in the nostril, and now I'm like working it into the lip so that there's connection in that little place under the nose. But if I put a mustache, it won't matter. Let's go ahead with some teeth. I normally would do it at the end, but let's go ahead. So you can do individual teeth and score each one. Molding it, flatten the edge, see if you like it. It's too big, too big. The trick though is you really gotta score it. This is a smaller scoring tool, so on little jugs this is kind of nice if you're getting in a tight space where that big one might scratch, you know, parts you don't want it to. Okay, scoring the tooth. And I'm not just it's not just the score, it is pushing it in. There's one. Let's try another. I'm not sure if I like it yet. Kind of making it, I don't know why I do this, but it's like triangular. Almost like the root of the teeth is. Yeah, little candy corn, exactly. Okay, there's those two. So I'm not sure about it yet either. I think it needs another. Those of you that have jugs, I know you're excited to try it now. I would be. You're probably got all these ideas in your mind.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Yes. Don't be upset if you're not hitting it exactly what's in your mind. Isn't art like that?
Yeah.
We're inspired, we have a vision,
Yeah.
and then we start doing it. It doesn't look like our vision, but sometimes it looks like something else. That's great. And I think that's where the path leads you, not to be stumbled if it's not quite what you first envisioned. I mean, and plus, you can make another, right? All right.
I think usually, like when I do things, I do them in succession, 5 or 6 at a
Yes.
time. And then by the time I get to the last 2 or so, it's
Yeah.
more of what I originally
Intended
because
for
I
it.
learn something each time.
Time, yes.
You know?
Or it's completely not what you intended, but you like it
But you
even
like it
more.
better.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so ears, I think going with something like that. All right, and I'm definitely, because this is kind of, I don't know, it's curved in, it's going to be easier. I'm going to lose some of that shape if I try it with my fingers. So I'm going to grab it with this tool. I am going to do the back of this one just because how it hits. And the bottom important and the top is important. Okay. General shape. Now let's do another. It's kind of tough. Let's see. Just a little, I'm just getting a little dab of water. Helps it roll and smooth in my hand. Okay, let's see. So I'm making my own slip on there. Does that match? Sorta, kinda. Okay. Okay. I like. No. Well, when I put the mouth on, I said it was like an ode to my father's, which he kind of became known for the sideways face after he started doing them.
Yeah, they're super cute.
Okay, it needs, and I see that that one's kind of taller. So I just squeezed it. Get a little bit more symmetry out of it. The eyebrows are going to take a little emphasis when we get that done off of the ears too, matching perfectly, because this one's got a little bit more. All right, just to draw those lines again. Think like inner ear, inner ear. All right. I'm going to push that down just to shape it a little because that has more. That's all right. Okay, he needs eyebrows. So I'm thinking with that eye up, this eyebrow should be up for expression. So I mean, I'm guessing when I'm scoring that, I realize it may not be perfectly on that scoring mark, but I can always work that in. You won't see it if I change the hair. There we go. Let's try this one now. I don't know. I'm going to put the other on before I decide. Okay. This one's down, this one up. All right. It's so pushed on, I probably wouldn't have to work it in, but then you just see the line, you know, the shape. Or again, we're trying to make it where people aren't thinking about shapes. When I build the animals, it's the same way. You don't want people to automatically see it and know how you put it together. You shouldn't be thinking that with your brain. It should just be like, there's an elephant, not a cylinder, a head, and some legs. You know, they think of it as still just an elephant. You shouldn't be thinking about how it was made. Okay. He has got the crookedest nose, which I'm loving in its own way. It's very, it's all from the,
Put it on there.
okay.
He likes it. Looks like he might have been in a fight.
We'll see about the eye placement too. So like that one probably should be there. Maybe that one moves. Got it stuck. When you get it stuck, then you got the wrong color on it, so then you have to clean it off. It's pretty tacky. All right, let's see if that's there. This one more here. Let's try. All right, needle tool for under detail. So I just did a little under, but then for the over eye, because we are emphasizing the height of this, right? And I'm not going to do it on this one. I don't know, maybe I should put a little. And then I like it. Now, if I were doing a mustache, I'm gonna do one. I don't know if I'll place it on here, but I want to show you a couple different ways. So a mustache. You can see my dad's is just a coil. But I give mine like this one right here. So it has a little bit more shape, and I'm just going to show you how I form that. Maybe 10 years ago, I started doing this kind of mustache. It just come off something I saw that inspired like a two-part mustache where I'm forming almost like the fat part on this side to a little, it's kind of comical if you get that little angle up. And that would be one half of it. So it could be one piece. You can carve away shape. Like my dad's is just a coil. I've done the little, kind of like the little Hitler stash thing. That's kind of funny on some. It may just be drawn. Do I have that on any of these? What is this one? That's the big one. None. Yeah, there you go. So it's just drawn on. There's no extra clay, but it gives the impression of it. So that's fine too. All right. I think this might be too small to match the other side. We'll see which one we like better and then adapt the other side. Okay. They're pretty close actually. Okay, so if I like that in general, I'm gonna go ahead and put it on. Kind of like it. So yes, with a little. So if you get the lip too close to the nose, you can't do that. So just keep that in mind. And then I'm just going to do the top half of it. And I am working on this because I want to show the overlap. I'm not working that in. I'm only working in, I'm really not working in the whole top. You got to work on pressing it. And I might press here, but I might go back if I lose some of the shape and kind of use that edge to reform the shape once I've mashed it in. So if you're not going to work it in, you really need to make sure you score the edge. Make it tacky. All right.
So how many of these do you think you've done and for how long?
I have no idea.
No.
I mean, I've made them for so many years.
Yeah.
And like I said, sometimes we'll turn 10 and I might do 5 and 5. I could do them all in one day and then I might take me 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's really hard. I just did a big batch and there were 20 in that.
Okay.
And then I won't make them for a little while. Like I'll let them sell off
Yeah.
and then I'll do other things. And then I'll be like, oh, I'm out of face jugs. Let's make some more. Yeah. So if I do that several times a year,
Yeah.
I would say maybe at least. And then
So what would your smaller ones go for?
this is 55 and that's 65.
Okay, and what
Yeah.
like
That
the
size, I think they're 155 now. 135, depends on, I can't really tell because this will shrink a little. So it might be a little less than that. I'm going to, but then like my dad's, I would have it, and I mean, for him, and he's retired now, you're looking at 250 for the same size, but retired. Not retired, maybe 50 more for the same size.
So is he
So
still
it depends.
doing them sometimes?
So he has made none this year, but he was waiting on our wood-fired kiln opening, and so we're making repairs. He only did that once last year. So it's a momentum with pottery, I think is the big thing.
Yeah.
If you're not out in your work studio every day,
Yeah.
then you're not making enough for a kiln load. So you can make a couple, and they're going to sit there. And I think if you've been a career potter, that's really hard to deal with because that just doesn't seem like enough. So dad's studio and mom's studio, like during the winter, it's cold. They don't go out there. And then spring comes, and it's like, well, you've got to work for a month solid to have enough for a big kiln. Come here. And so he's been taking care of my elderly grandmother and then some other stuff, and that the lack of momentum is the issue. So we were going to, when we, I know how to motivate them. I basically send an email saying that we're having our family kiln opening and we have a deadline, and then we get on it. That's what happens every year. But this year we had repairs to the kiln, and so I wasn't able to, and now we're missing our window because you know fall gets really busy for me. And Dad was out there the other day. He's like, I really like to make, he loves turning. He's actually a master thrower. He is really good at turning pots. And his interest right now is he would love to just turn pots. He doesn't want to glaze them. I think that's interesting. So wood firing is not glazing them. That's the old traditional way. And for me, it's like my family heritage to work with my family. I love it for that, but we do it once a year. So you take a month to make all these pots, start what you're doing. And the window's gone as soon as we're busy and in show season.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we're going to do it this year.
Open it, and you said you
We
don't
would have had it the first weekend in June. We used to do it during spring kiln opening,
Okay.
and we didn't. So I fired with someone else so that I could be on the wood fire tour.
Right.
But if I could get the repairs made this year, we've already had the welding fixed, and we have to do the top concrete part that's on the top. So I just got a mud mixer. But a lot of these things, there's no sure way of how it's done. You can ask, I've asked a million potter friends, and everybody has something different. So until we start tackling it, and it's just not something you walk out and do, but
I know.
we're
in the
close.
middle of building a kiln.
Yes, you know, it takes time, and it's a little frustrating because it's not on the timeline I would like. All right, he needs a beard. Don't y'all think he's missing like a chin and a beard? I think so.
And it cuts the space there.
Yes. So let's do that, and then this one will be finished. All right, so that's really just a simple lump of clay. I think I want to do a little narrow one. My dad, on a lot of his pieces, would do this little chin with a little, what do you call it, chin dimple? That might be fun. But I'm just going to add a lot of clay down there and texturize it. But with adding this wad, we don't want to trap air, so that's really kind of difficult. I'm going to make it.
Your boys interested in?
They are, but let's be honest. kids are distracted nowadays. They are anyway. So I have to, my kids are 11 and 12 years old. And for years now, they've been seeing me do this. And I'm like, now you make one. And I've spent a little time showing them. And then I will have to take the phones away and say 30 minutes, make something in clay. So we have just got a mushroom deal from a store. It's so cute. We have an actual order for my kids. Yeah, so when a gallery came in to see me for face jugs, and in it he liked how I was teaching my kids to make clay. And he showed us a mushroom that is a little simple hand-built mushroom that he sells in his store. And he gave them an order for 50. So I had to lay out a plan, like that's a lot of mushrooms, and if we have to do it in 1 month and you come once or twice a week, how many mushrooms do you make in one sitting? Yeah, and it was a lot for them, but it is showing them how to, consistency and how business works. Plus they were been hand building enough that once I showed them how to do it, they were able to make them. We just did our first 8.
Nice.
So very sweet. But Jimmy loves making faces. He makes like a flat mask. And I keep telling him, I showed him how to make like a coil, not a coil, but a slab shot glass-like thing, but we call them toothpick holders. And they can put a face on it so that people who buy it have something to do with it. But Jimmy loves making a flat disc with a face on it, just something like that. Yeah, so they're getting there. My parents did not give me much choice. I'm not giving my kids much choice either. Like, you're here, get off the phone, get creative. And because of that, it's starting to pay off. I didn't know if it was going to. And maybe because I was a girl and I was crafty, my parents didn't have to do that much. I was there with them. I just made things all the time. Yeah. And selling them, that was a motivator because, I mean, I think of any artist, even young ones, I'm feeling this, but it's kind of up against the bat. We need people to appreciate our art, and that inspires us to do more. So as a kid, people liking my pieces. As a teenager, definitely. Getting paid for that keeps you interested. So they sell their little things in my shop.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. And I have a little money envelope, so they go check it, see if they sold something. I write down what it was. Okay, so we have, because this is on a bat, I am unable to really work that in underneath.
Can you talk a little bit about why you leave it on the bat?
I think it's for transportation of it. So when this is large, we could, but then you're going to have 5 or 6 that you're cutting off, and they're all on this huge board that's too heavy to pick up. So it's just easier to transport, I think, is why we do that.
Okay.
I don't really think about it that much. It's just something we do. Whereas the small ones we're cutting off and putting onto a board of, for 5 or 10 of them. But this is definitely a hindrance that I can't get under there because I think that's going to kind of show. So if that bothers me, I might actually kind of, and honestly, if I were in my shop, I would, this would be facing me and I would be kind of doing this number and getting under there. Where with you guys, I'm really wanting you to be able to watch as I sculpt it. So it's a little different. All right. I think that's pretty good though. So now just texturizing it. I've got to use the same texture. We talked about the wire tool, giving it not like lots of kind of gristle, but I kind of like mine to be the same. So I'm going to take that off. Just going to start over here. And I'm going to draw it. But having said that, the beard can come from here, right? So I'm going to make a line, kind of give it a little more shape. See about this side, and from here too. So I didn't add clay up to there, but just cutting that away gives it the illusion. And I'm just going to start texturizing from there. He's really crooked. I might add a little bit to that. I feel like it's kind of dry, just not. Add a little. I don't like, just because I've not been able to look at it straightforward, I don't like how it's pointed over there. So I'm gonna fix it. I don't like that at all. I think it's off center, and it's because I was looking at it upside down. And we'll bring that on over. So I'm just gonna start over for the molding of it. There we go. I'm gonna cut that away underneath. Let me see. So sometimes what you put on you don't like, right? You just look at it, figure out what it is about it. I think it's that I need some clay over here to balance it. You see how it's just shifted a bit? Yeah, it's the lip, sideways lip, and I didn't put the beard to mimic it. I was just putting one on, and I should have picked it up and looked at it, but let's see. I'm gonna balance it. So I'm gonna add some clay here. I don't do this a lot, but you can do it. It's really just pressing some more in. Make sure you're not trapping air. Okay, yeah, that filled the beard out a little bit more. So his chin is more symmetrical, even though his whole face isn't symmetrical. It's all right. See, it was way over here.
Yeah.
That didn't look right. He's got this big jaw going on. I love how when I demonstrate, it's like a whole different look than what I normally do. I think because you are upside down doing it. You're looking at it from upside down. And you're talking, and you're just kind of...
I don't think people realize how difficult it is to work in both sides of your brain.
Right? Yeah. All right, so here's where, at the end, is where I would really even play with the mouth and get it back to some kind of expression that I like. Okay, he's definitely quirky. I like it that way. What do you think? Ta-da.
Yes.
Let's give him a name.
Yes.
What does he look like?
We could call him Monty from Montgomery.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah?
Is that sure, I like that, Monty. I'll put it here. How's that spelled? T-Y, Monty. I'm gonna put MCC demo. That way when it comes back around in 20 years, we'll be like, oh, remember that? There's a video on that somewhere. We have, there's a jug in my shop. It's so cool. I got it back from a collection. And I remember I was 16 years old when this furniture company in High Point called American Drew Furniture did a series of furniture called Seagrove, kind of based on sea. They even had salt glaze as like a whitewashed glaze, but they meant it for the sea. But because of it, they had Seagrove potters come and demonstrate in the showroom of that. And my dad was one of them, and I was 16 years old in high school. And we went there to demonstrate, and there is a newspaper article that I still have that's a picture of me holding one of my lions. It's one of my signature pieces. At 16 years old, my dad's demoing, and we're talking to some executives from High Point about Seagrove. So there is a face jug that my dad made for the owner of that furniture company, and it's special signed to him, American Drew Furniture, blah, 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 to him. And it has literally, after, 30 years, come back, and I have that piece and the article, and I'm just like, it's just too cool. Really like, cool. Yeah.
That is really cool.
So, Monty from MCC, we hope he comes back. Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna put a handle on it. Yeah.
Love Monty.
Yeah, I'm gonna put a handle on it. I'm gonna do it right now. Let me cut off some of this.
Now, with that being a different type of clay, is that gonna go in your wood fire?
So, as long as I fire this, it needs to either go in our wood fired, or I have a gas kiln that I can fire that would fire hotter than Cone 6. So it would be for that. Yeah.
Now, is that your dad's, is that the same type of clay?
Yes. Well, you know, I don't think that is back then, because it was before Starworks. So this was something else he was using, and I don't remember what it was at the time. We were buying from somewhere else. This, I mean, I don't have an example of what this will look like, but it's a little bit darker, I think, just a tiny bit. And everybody's kiln fires it out a different way because you're getting different reduction. So depending on how you fire your wood kiln, the actual glazing would be different. I mean, and look at this. I think this was B mix, if I'm not mistaken, but it got very little salt versus this one with a really heavy salt. This one was in the front, I can tell, because of the drippings and the ash on the top of it, where this one was probably protected and on a lower level of the kiln. Our kiln's really big. There's some pictures on my website if you're interested in that. If you follow me on Facebook and Instagram, I share a lot of making. I'm always sharing making things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you be able to repost this from the MC?
I hope so. We'll talk technology, because that's whoo, sometimes they're in my head. But yes, I would love to share that to people.
On YouTube, is that correct?
Technology talk. Whew, it's now being a potter, you got to be a technology person too. But people enjoy watching, so I do share a lot of just little tidbits, making it on the the live video, not live, but the stories. Yeah. All right, so this clay is harder for making a handle, only because I've let it dry out a little bit. It's not their fault, it's mine. But we can do this. It just means more squeezing and actually, hand cramping if you've made too many, but I can make one. All right, so here it goes. So now with the thumb actually you can see on a lot of handles this kind of indentation where the thumb pulls. And I find fascinating on a lot of old jugs, like, well, let me show you. Do you see on Mom and Dad's handle, the finger mark right here? The thumbprint. So once you have it attached, you put your thumbprint in it. And I just think, what a cool maker's mark. There's my mom's. I'm looking to see, okay, AV has one on his thumbprint. And then here's one on mine. What I'm saying is right here, this indentation, he didn't. Sometimes I work mine out and sometimes I show it. Berlin Craig has a little one there. I think it's almost a little habit. We have a little habit. Putting our little thumbprint at the very end. Okay.
Is that something that they were taught?
I'm wondering, so maybe I was taught, maybe it's natural to do it. I don't know. We tend to not all, but a lot of people have it. Where's my scoring tool? There it is. So right underneath the base, and I'm just going to kind of go up toward like not over this was kind of the typical. This one has more of a neck on it than the other one did. So I am looping it here, working it in. Both sides were scored. Out like that. It would be so fragile. All right. Sometimes I leave a little curve on mine, but, and I could do that. Well, I don't know, it sticks up too much on this one. But there's that, and then my thumb mark. That's just like an extra press. Kind of off center there, okay. Some of my decorative vases, I'll do the little handle. I don't know, I don't like it on that one. I don't know why. I just didn't, okay. It's like it was feminine. No, I'm feeling it on that one. All right, and another thing is what you'll find is it's easier to make masculine features than it is to make feminine. And I think that's why you see the jugs, I mean, it's fun to make facial hair. I think they tend to just be more masculine than feminine. There's a few female face jug makers, how do you say that? Not women, that make female jugs. That's what I'm trying to say. My mom made what we call a little girl jug. It had pigtails for years, a little kind of pierced lips, sort of like. But in general, a lot of face jugs tend to be more masculine. And I think it's just that features are easier than feminine. So that might be a challenge for you. Try to make a feminine. Yeah, yes, yes. But I think that's it. Do y'all have any more questions? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And thank you for my non-class members who came
Yes.
to see Crystal. We
Yes, thank
appreciate
you for
it.
joining classes and coming in.
Yes.
Good. And come see me anytime.
Make sure to see if we're on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go